Okay, let's make a start. Are we live? Good. Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I'm Simon Carswell, Chair of the Committee, and I'll invite Claire to introduce the supporting team.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Claire Rendell. I'm from Governance. I'm here to clerk the meeting. I'm accompanied by my colleague Steve Taylor as well from Democratic Services. And we've got Alan Weldon and I do apologise, I can't remember your colleague's name. Richard, thank you, from licensing here today for you.
Thank you, Claire. Welcome everybody online as well. I don't think there's any members of the public here today. Today's meeting will be run using the webcasting system via Microsoft Teams. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the Luttrell room at the County Hall. Thank you for so many of you attending, because I haven't chased anybody, so it's good to see so many of you here. Other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on specific, a lot of people say Pacific, don't they? I don't know why they do. Specific agenda items or observe. This meeting is being webcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. There may be a slight delay between agenda items. Why? Anyway, doesn't matter. The agenda pack with papers is available via ModGov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. When you're invited to speak, could you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting, so they can identify who is speaking. And the meeting is audio recorded. Finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, can I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Can I ask for apologies for absence?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? I think I should just state that I do have, as we're reviewing the gambling policy, I do have a gambling licence.
Thank you. And I also have, a unlicensed FEC licence, a couple of AGC licences. I'm just thinking, I think that's it for when it comes to the gambling policy. Thank you.
Anybody else? No. Thank you. Oh, right. Yeah. It seems, yes, there could be issues, Tony, because there's Wi-Fi issues here. There are Wi-Fi issues we've got at County Hall. So you've got a problem bringing up the agenda, did you say? Yeah. I think we have got Wi-Fi issues.
I can send around a link to the chat and you can use the website, which should work.
I think Claire's going to send around a link.
I've got it here. I'll share with Tony.
Can you share?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Public question time. There have been no submissions for statements question received by the deadline. And I don't think there's any late or urgent questions from the public. Right, we'll move on to statement of principles of gambling policy, and I'm going to invite Alan Weldon to introduce the report included in the agenda pack. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, everybody. I won't dwell too much on the report itself. Basically, what it's saying is that the Gambling Act requires you to have a statement of principles, which acts as your gambling policy. The Act says we have to have one, so this is kind of why it's here. Essentially, what we're doing, first of all, a bit like the licensing policy I think you had last month, is we're going pre-consultation with the draft. This has been drafted in accordance with the legislation, the guidance, Gambling Commission guidance, and so forth. Really, we're looking for your approval for this to go out to consultation, probably for 8 to 10 weeks, and then it will come back to you with consultation responses for you to decide the final policy. So today basically is just the approval to go out to consultation, same as the licensing one that you've done, which has now subsequently gone out to consultation that you would have heard from Jack last month. basically, I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of pages. I don't know if everyone's got access to it, obviously. I'll try my best to explain where we're going. Sorry.
I think some members have, and those who haven't are sharing with others.
Don't mind by the web.
Claire, I've got,
Councillors, I have sent round a link. You may wish to use that instead of your mod.gov app because we are having Wi-Fi issues, which you've all been emailed about this morning. So it could be that it's impacting your mod.gov app. So it may be that the website might be the better way to do it.
Link to your email.
Claire, sorry, I don't know if it helps. I've got a downloaded copy on my desktop. Can I email that to you? Would that be better? Brilliant.
We'll email the PDF pack to all members now, and then you should be able to see the agenda. Alan, do you want to continue?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to what I was saying about the policy, basically it is quite hefty, probably in comparison with a lot of the policies you'll see. We basically decided that that was a necessary step. With Licensing Act, it's a day-to-day workload for us. I can hear some pings, that's hopefully a good thing. It's a day-to-day stuff for us in terms of Licensing Act, and some of you would have already sat on the copious amounts of subcommittees we seem to have had over the last couple of months. We were hoping it was going to be quiet. That hasn't happened, but it's given us the opportunity to run those. Gambling isn't a day-to-day thing for us as officers either, and it's probably very rare that you'll see an issue before you at subcommittee level. So we decided that we would make the policy a signposted policy, if you like. So that would help members, it would help officers, particularly helpful to businesses and very helpful to the public. So the policy has a lot of stuff in it, including even down to the details of gambling permits and gaming machine permits and prize gaming permits. The reason is we would like the businesses to be able to have a one document they can go to, even if they just want to find out one small detail about a permit, it's going to be in there. And there's adequate links as well. So it has increased in size, but we feel for good reason, for those reasons, really. The important thing to remember, I think, is that we don't have a responsibility. And for those of you who have not dealt with gambling before, we don't have a responsibility for online gambling. Now, with the government's white paper that's just been published, that is quite in the public domain at the moment in terms of a lot of the things that are going to be corrected, hopefully, with the problems with online gambling. Our responsibility is land-based gambling alone. So I know Vice Chair's already mentioned family entertainment centres, adult gaming centres, the betting shops as well. Those are our prime objectives. So even though online gambling is much under scrutiny at the moment, the only bit we have to worry about as a licensing authority is the land-based stuff, because the Gambling Commission will oversee the rest. In the white paper, there is also things placed in it that will affect land-based gambling. One of the examples is it's not been popular up to now to allow people debit cards to pay at the machines for the credits they put in. For obvious reasons, historically, regulators would like to see people having a break from the machines. So in the old days with cash only, you'd have to move to go to a bank or go to an ATM and then come back to the machine rather than doing this. Now, the thinking has turned around a bit in that the industry's got to keep up with the fact, particularly since the pandemic, that there's a lot of card payments now. And secondly, that there are protections you can put in if people use debit cards to pay. For instance, that might lead to more account-based gambling, which would reduce some of the risks of keeping an eye on what people spend. We've decided not really to include the white paper because some of it's going to have to go out to consultation, some's going to have to go for regulatory changes, and some's going to have to go for legislation changes. So I think the government estimate that the first impact will be probably in 12 to 14 months' time. Obviously, the way things move, when parliamentary time allows, that could be even later. So what we've done is we've kept that out of here, but I think we've got, from a land-based point of view, and I'll try and point out a couple of things, I think we've got good protections in there that you can be rest assured that our operators run properly, and we can engage with them. So to stop me rambling on about the introduction, I'll take you really to some pointers in the documents. Hopefully you've got access to them now. If I can take you first, and I'm referring, there's a lot of page numbers, obviously. I'm going to refer to the page numbers at the bottom of the pages that represent the report itself, as Chair said. Just to draw your attention, first of all, to page 23. If I scroll down as well, it's not very quick, I do apologise. There we go. We're looking at the licensing objectives, and really for those of you that haven't dealt a lot with gambling in the past, it's a bit different to the Licensing Act objectives. With that, that's short and sharp. There's 4 of them: prevention of crime and disorder, prevention of public nuisance, public safety, and protection of children from harm. And you've already dealt with that, I know, in the subcommittees you've had. So there's quite an emphasis on short and sharp, and it seems to be obvious where they fall. And also, operators have got to promote the licensing objectives. So your decisions are based on the promotion of those objectives. With gambling, it's a bit different in that operators have to act reasonably consistently with the licensing objectives. And there are 3 of them. I won't spend too long on them because they're covered in full at the end of the report. At the end of the document, as you'll see. First one, preventing gambling from being a source of crime or disorder, being associated with crime or disorder, or being used to support crime. Now, one of the things obviously that comes to mind is money laundering. So there has to be protections in place about that, and businesses not being used as a basis for crime. And some of that overlaps onto the Licensing Act stuff. Similar thing, you can't use a premises to cover other areas that might cause criminal issues. The next one is ensuring that gambling is conducted in a fair and open way. Pretty much the Gambling Commission have got to make sure that operators operate fairly for their customers. We don't get involved so much in that. That wouldn't be a concern that you would need to address. But obviously the third one is the key one, and probably the thing that we can influence the most as local regulators, which is protecting children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. So children's obvious, same as the Licensing Act, really. There are several premises that you can't walk through the door if you're not 18, betting shops, AGCs, that kind of thing. And by that I mean adult gaming centres, so the ones that have got the high stake and high return machines that cannot be played by anybody under 18. That's obvious, but the vulnerable persons thing is, again, probably in the public domain a lot in terms of problem gambling and people that can't control the ways that they gamble, the amounts that they gamble, or even control the effect that it has on their lives. And obviously, as a local authority, that's where really we can put in place safeguards in liaison with our operators to make sure our expectations are carried out and that the expectations of you as a committee are satisfied that they're doing their best to ensure that people are not exploited or taken advantage of. Touch on that in a second. So those are your objectives, a bit different to the Licensing Act and a bit more detailed, but also probably a bit wider in their interpretation too. Page 31, and that's point 2.3. And this isn't happening very quick, so I will get there, apologies. 2.3, right, gambling prevalence and social responsibility. And this, I'll just touch on it briefly to say that it kind of says gambling related harm is defined as any type of repetitive gambling that disrupts or damages a person, family or recreational pursuits. And it goes on to say the impact that it can have on families and the societal problems it can lead to. Now, to be fair, although that's the major issue facing operators, how can they show that they're acting in order to support that licensing objective? It's easy to see gambling as in terms of harm, whereas in reality, it's also a very useful aspect for our local economy. It's a socializing form of recreation. It can prevent isolation. Bingo's a good example of that. And what we're looking at is a minority of people that need to be catered for in this respect. Gambling is there really to promote and to help with our local economies. So you'll hear a lot of things that probably are quite rightly pointed towards the harm section, but we've also, your role as a licensing committee is basically to aim to permit gambling to take place. So when we're faced with an application, and if there are objections, it comes to you guys as a committee, your first stance is to aim to permit gambling to take place. So similar to licensing, in that you would only maybe refuse that application if there is good reason to do so based on the objectives. So it's a similar thing in terms of aim to permit unless something could go badly wrong, effectively. So there's no way that we can just say to a gambling premises, no, you can't have it because we don't think it should be there. We'll go on to talk about location, which is quite important. Before we do, part of the things we'll look at are local area risk assessments, which you might have seen from the report. Since the social responsibility codes came in from the Gambling Commission relatively recently, anybody with a premises licence now has to come out with a local area risk assessment. And that is really effectively plotting where they are against all the risks. So to give you an example, you'd think that the big names would have a better local area risk assessment. Actually, we're finding the independents have the better ones because they know the areas they're in. And we're trying to discourage regional managers from the big names just doing a cut and paste local area risk assessment. We had one that had forgotten to take Sheffield out, for instance. So you'll be glad to know Sheffield's now relocated to the North Somerset coast. But that is a prime example, really, of where we're going, well, no, okay, we need the local managers to literally look outside the premises and then plot where all the risks are. Because if you're going to protect the vulnerable, children, relatively simple, spot them to a large degree and make sure there's age controls. The vulnerable people, however, is a lot more difficult to police because how would operators know? There are self-exclusion schemes, but it's down to the operators to say, okay, how can I make sure that my premises is protected against these risks? So the local area risk assessment is drawn up. We're going in the policy to say that should always be on the premises. So if it goes, oh no, that's with the regional manager in Bristol, that's not going to be good enough. We need the local area risk assessment on the premises because the key is the people that work there need to know what's in it. So that is how really we can affect land-based gambling, and you can as a committee. And we feel it's important we put as much as possible in here because A, it shows that we're serious in ensuring there's protections, but B, it gives any new operator that might come in exactly what we'll require. So you'll see stuff in there. We'll go through just a couple of pages. I won't take much more of your time. So it is a balance between the risks of gambling related harm, but the fact that gambling is enjoyed as a pastime by millions of people safely and securely. If I can next take you to page 35, I might have covered some of that in the location descriptions. I think it's point 4.3. Yeah, there we go, location. Now there is one in the north area that, if you like, ticks all the boxes because we're saying, okay, risk assess where you are. Well, they've got a secondary school directly opposite. They've got a college directly behind. They have got a bargain booze next door. They're in an area where there's regular families, and they're also in an area that has historically had economic deprivation. So you would say probably if it was a new premises, the alarm bells would be ringing. But the fact that they run it so well and the fact that they've got an excellent local area risk assessment means that we get no issues. And they're probably, it's in Bridgewater and it's surrounded. So anyone will go, no, that's not going to happen there. Whereas in reality, they run it so well based off the back of a local area risk assessment. We think that's very important to get across, which is why it's featured quite a lot in the policy. If that makes sense. Gone to location, pretty much what I've already described, and there's a list of things that people need to be aware of. I think local area risk assessments is mentioned more on the next page, on page 36. And that gives you a full list. And again, it's business. This is a point of making it a signposted policy. I think with the Licensing Act, it's a bit different. It's a bit loosely defined. With gambling, it's not. And we feel that at least any new proprietor can say, we know what Somerset Council want from us. They clearly put it into the policy. So you'll see long lists in there of suggestions that we've got, even to cover things like carnival season. If they're situated on a route where the carnival's going to be, that's going to be a massive risk on the day, particularly for betting shops. Prime example, parents stood in front of the betting shops, 2-3-year-old children want the toilet, don't go in the betting shop. You know, basic stuff like that. You're going to have to find somewhere else to go to get the kids to go to the loo. Finally, page 54. So we're moving on a bit. Mine's not scrolling down particularly quickly, sorry, 54. This relates more to the definition of premises for anybody that's going to come into the area for a premises license. Now, without going into great detail about it, we've already mentioned premises licenses, for the example of the AGCs, the betting shops, casinos, of which there are none in the Somerset area at the moment, things like that. There's also permits, but for the premises, the definition you'll find on that page 54, it also further down gives you examples of layouts on the premises, because historically we've had issues with some operators. Say they're running 2 areas in one building, which quite often happens. You probably see it at the seaside. You've got your kiddies, probably unlicensed family entertainment centre at the front, but you've got an adult gaming centre behind. There has to clearly be some definition of separation between those premises, and particularly with entrances, egresses, and how it sits within the building. And sometimes we get told there's a clear definitive line between my 2 premises because I've got a different colour bit of carpet for about 6 foot. Really, that's not what we're looking for. If it's an existing business that's running without risk and they've got a good local area risk assessment and there are no complaints, then okay, for the time being, they fit the need. But anybody else coming in that's got a new premises or wants to vary their existing one, again, we've given clear instructions in terms of layouts and what we expect, with the protecting children and vulnerable people from harm in mind. So finally, really just to say, when we do inspections, we do go through this kind of thing. We look at their self-exclusion schemes. There are different self-exclusion schemes for different types, excuse me, of gambling, like betting shops, like bingo. So as part of the inspection process, we also look at local area risk assessments. And even when we're not doing inspections, we're asking them to send them in. So it gives us an opportunity to make sure they're kept up to date, etc. That's pretty much it, I think, just for the first meeting. So I hope that was useful. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Richard, in that respect. No. So, Chair, back to you, please. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'll pass on to committee members now for any questions. Simon, I think I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. A few years ago, there was an application to put a betting shop in a high street not far from here. It was refused by the local planning authority because there were a number of betting shops in quite close proximity. The applicant appealed and the appeal was upheld. And there was a lot of concern at the time that suddenly we had, relying on a fairly poor memory, suddenly we had 4 in less than 100 yards. And the local planning authority felt that was too high a density, but the planning inspector did not agree, and we lost with costs. I wonder at what point can the local planning authority actually say, we think there are too many gaming establishments in this area?
The demand is something we can't, as a committee, take into account under the Licensing Act. What am I talking about? Under the Gambling Act. Interestingly, what you say though, I think it's the white paper, is thinking about introducing cumulative, I can't say this, cumulative impact zones. Because the Licensing Act, and you might have seen that from the policy, enables cumulative impact zones. We haven't got any in Somerset at the moment, though there is one possibly being discussed in South. The white papers sought to address that, and again, it would have to go out to consultation. It might even need primary legislation change, where they would bring that in. It'll probably need primary and secondary and consultation. So that's looking at being addressed. The problem we have is planning and licensing is separate. So ironically, they could still apply for a license, but of course, that's the issue we're facing. So I think that's going to be addressed with what's being suggested under the white paper, if that helps.
Yes, in the sense that it's finally being addressed, but I think it's quite possibly going to end up being too little too late. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. I think I'd comment that I think in the training we had, unfortunately, it's supply and demand, and we can't say there is a limit to the number of betting shops or premises in an area at the moment, but perhaps that will change. And also the point you made that planning and licensing are separate. Can I just ask a question? Do we have sufficient resources to, and how often do we visit premises?
Historically, I think it's been different depending on which area in Somerset you're in. In the north, we've done inspections over the course because we had some issues in Breen for a while in terms of the coastline. So we're looking to formulate some kind of consistency as we move forward. That's one of the things on the agenda across the county. We've been lucky enough to have Richard, who used to work for the Gambling Commission. And so we've been in a position where we can send someone with that detail of knowledge to be able to go and do the inspections. Even when we don't inspect, though, what I think we should do moving forward is get hold of those local area risk assessments, because if they're clear and they're in place and we've had no complaints, it might well be that we should focus our inspections around where they're not being done properly and make it a more focus-based one rather than everyone. If that makes sense. But that's something that's on the agenda for the licensing leads to look at, is certainly formulating that across the county. That helps.
Thank you. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back a little bit actually to where you were talking about premises that you need to have a demarcation line between, and you stated that with some premises that you have no problems with, then you're quite happy, but all new premises would have to show. Isn't that a conflict really, or should we not be setting a standard that is for everything rather than a bit of this and a bit of that?
We could. I think the reason we've decided, I think as well, added to new, I think we've got to the variation of existing. Occasionally we get variations in. Now that variation would trigger the new policy where they'd look into it and go, actually, I know what I've got to do to get to that standard. We have got a number of, I kind of started at the problem end, didn't I? We've got a number of premises that we've addressed that through that might not strictly fit this policy, but we're setting it here, if you like. Whereas what we've got at the moment with some is here, but it's working. And we don't get complaints and we're satisfied they work properly. The problem we've had since the pandemic is the industry is struggling. And we didn't want to be anti-business and say, right, you've all got to fit that now. Because it might be for very little gain on the ones that might not be strictly complying with that, but they're complying with everything else. So in other words, they're not a risk in terms of vulnerable people and children. And I think if we're satisfied that there's no risk, I would argue that's probably good enough. And overall, it will start to drive up standards with what we're suggesting here. I think we've gone very high here. Not every policy will have that in there in terms of you've even got to get your exits and your egresses separate. That I think is a very high starting point. And some of our premises won't make that, but again, they're not causing problems. So I'd be happy as an officer knowing that's the case. And if we do get a problem, we can say that problem's happening because you're not complying with the policy. So it's now failed. This is what we expect you to do. I think we'd have the flexibility to do that. Okay.
Diogo.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just trying to get an idea, really, or better understanding as to kind of around the location of premises. You said there are a couple of good examples earlier on, or you mentioned that earlier. And one comes to mind when I look at the location kind of required factors. And without wanting to be too specific about it to everyone else and bore everyone else, but in Sydenham, which you probably know of, down Parkway, which is a gambling shop in front almost of a secondary school, with a college directly behind it, with a community centre next to it, a park just to in front of it to the right. And I just wonder, and also the beginning part for the carnival, also right in front of that shop. And yes, so lots of college students congregate outside during their college breaks because there are other shops, the co-op, what have you next to that. So I'm just wondering how somewhere like that would be accepted when initially I would look at that and think, blooming heck, according to this, that's probably the wrong place for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've got to be honest, that was the example I was given, yeah. So you're right. I mean, I think it's been there for some time.
Yes.
And obviously the Gambling Act came in 05 and the social responsibility probably about 6 years ago. 5 or 6, I think.
Risk assessment, yeah.
Yeah, so things have developed fast. You're right. I think now, if it came to a subcommittee where there have been objections and representations, I think the decision would be, okay, how much of this place is going to be a risk? Now, if the operator could satisfy you that actually it's in a maelstrom of problems, but we're going to operate it like this, we're going to have something that you know, we're going to engage with the schools, we'll engage with the colleges, we'll make sure that the correct information goes out to them, because the school's less of an issue during the day, I think, because they can monitor that quite well. But you touched on the college, and that's right, because people out of school uniform that might be 18, that might be 25, sorry, 16 or 25 is very different. And speaking to the managers in there, they've really got that sorted. And we don't have complaints. I don't think we've ever had complaints from that premises, which I think speaks a lot for that, as actually being the example of where you would go, blimey, not there, but it actually works. And I think that's the point, is that you've got to aim to permit gambling to take place. So unless there's evidence to suggest they can't run it, or it is a problem, and this is a problem you'll have, a bit like licensing act, when you get a new application in, all the fears are speculative because it's probably not been there before. Whereas if you get a review of a gambling premises or a variation, you'll have the history to go with that. And that will be more evidence based. So unless there's evidence or a very, very good cause to refuse, then the aim is to permit and make sure that they comply. But no, it's not the only example of the district where you'll look and go, sorry, the county actually. In Bridgewater, we've got 4 betting shops that are reasonably close together, 3 of which are different names, but it seems to work. In that part of the town and in the high street, the cumulative impact doesn't seem to be a problem. And again, we're not getting problems. The issue is, if we get complaints, we can address them. If we can't get complaints, then we do the inspections, and if they're okay, or we look at the risk assessment. So I think the point I made earlier about being targeted in future to make a good use of resources is important. Sorry, I've rambled a bit then. Did that make sense? Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions? Yes, Tony.
Sorry to interject, councillor. Have you actually got your mic on? Because we're getting reports they can't hear online.
Oh, sorry. My phone works though. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think you got the gist of where I'm coming from, that very fine line between planning, though they are separate things. They may have the planning permission to do that, fine. But it doesn't mean to say they're going to have the license renewed to be able to do what they want to do, because what their alterations are not compliant with the policy.
Yep, that's dead right, actually. I think it's a good point because we mentioned you could have a variation, for instance. So you're right, it goes through the planning because they can choose to do the planning first or the licensing first, effectively. So say they went through the planning and got it, you're quite right. If then the variation for the gambling license got objected to, then you're looking at a subcommittee to consider that application. So you guys would then make the decision as to what happens with the license, and it could be refused. We've got something in the pot. You're right about not aligning them. The problem we have is, and if you talk to planners and licensing officers, the first thing we'll say is, please can someone at government level bring them closer together, because they, particularly with licensing act, they sit too far apart. There needs to be some kind of review to look at that and bring them closer together. In the absence that we can't do that, this policy has got, I think there's something in there, I forget what page, and my pages are out of sync as well. But it does mention if there's a significant change in the area through, say for example, Councillor Rodriguez's example, say that all of a sudden you've got a bargain booze off licence next door, or a college opens up down the street, or another betting shop opens, then they will have to change their local area risk assessment to show what the risks are. Similarly, if they change their own premises and nothing changes outside, they've still got to change that risk assessment, because what they've changed, and you said change the remit of the business, it might be that they had a unlicensed family entertainment centre and now they've got an adult gaming centre opening up alongside and an extension. That significantly increases the risk, because obviously you've got children here in the entertainment centre and an adult gaming centre, so that's within their premises. Nothing has changed outside, but the policy says in those circumstances, they've got to reassess the risks, and they should produce that when they make their variation application.
Mr. Chairman, I'll switched on this time. And just following on from what you said there with the risk assessments, I mean, we all know the problems we've got with housing and homelessness in certain areas, and there's peaks and troughs with it. So, I mean, one minute you may not have a problem with houses of multiple occupation, and then 6-9 months down the line, that house could be converted into a HMO, and you know, your risk assessment changes. So this is why you cannot have, I don't think you can have a mix and match where, because it hasn't happened before, you've got to go for either what you're trying to achieve in the round, in the whole, which may be a high bar to set, but, and not liked by some people, but that's what you've got to go for, I think.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah,
Thank you,
it's
Tony.
all right to come back, Joe. Yep, thanks. I think you're right. And again, and I think what the policy does enables that flexibility for us, because you mentioned 2 examples there. If either risk will get picked up, because if it's a variation to the premises, so they've changed what's indoors, then they've got to produce the risks. If it's, as you said, say, I don't know, all of a sudden you've got 3 Victorian homes, for argument's sake, that are converted into HIMOs, which would be another risk because you've got more people in the area. They could be working shift work, which means that the premises will be open when they finish shifts. That wouldn't need to be a variation, but they would have to then go, right, that's happened. They'd have to stay active and aware of what's going around, and we promote that. They would have to put that in their risk assessment. That would just be a change of risk assessment. And I think the policy is clear on that, and I think it gives us the flexibility to know what's going on, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
He did ask me if I could just answer. Yeah, it makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense with HMOs, because a lot of people that go into HMOs are ex-servicemen who's got problems, people who have got alcohol problems and everything. So I say it's just not a one fits all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I think Hugh, did you have a question?
No, it's just an observation really, and seek the officer's opinion. It's regarding records of people who have not done what they should done. And would you find that the multiple ones, the big name people, are the ones that observe the law more, and the smaller one-man businesses, perhaps, or two or three, don't? Because why I'm asking the question is because of the inference that we're not looking after it correctly because they've been going a long time and we're leaving it alone. I used to gamble a lot, and so I know the rules on this side of thing, and I find that myself, the smaller companies were perhaps the problem, where it was too friendly to their customers, shall we call them. But what have you found in your job throughout the area?
We found it's because we've kept on top of the local area risk assessments and we kept on on top of the inspections. We found they're pretty much compliant anyway. I mean, it's worth mentioning that they're all very good, I think. And yes, the bigger names do benefit from a national policy, if you like. Whether the staff locally can relate to that is the test, i.e. when you go in, you want to see someone who's locally behind the counter say, I know what our policy is and here it is, rather than saying talk to the regional manager, because clearly you need that at the local level. With the independents, I kind of mentioned it earlier, actually, they're very, very, very good at assessing the risks because it's their business, they're passionate about it, they know what's going on in the area. And they were the first to come out and say, right, we'll do the local area risk assessment. So we've said, what do you do? Well, I sent one of my managers out and he walked around and plotted everything. Perfect. That's the starting point. So I think it swings and roundabouts, but I wouldn't say any one is better than the other. I think they're all very compliant. If a problem comes up, we've had that with big names as well as independents. Citing a gaming machines is a prime example. We've had to tell some big names to move gaming machines. We've had to tell some independents. So I don't think there's any, we've not detected, in my experience, in the north area at least, can't speak so much yet for the wider area. I don't think there's a problem specifically with one or the other. I know it's hedging my bets a bit, but I genuinely think that. Would you agree with that?
Is it right or left?
Left, I think.
No, I mean, speaking to someone who actually does the inspections and has done inspections of gambling premises now for 7 or 8 years, there is no correlation between size of operator and problems occurring. Generally, the independent operators, the smaller operators, tend to be a bit more agile, if anything. Just when issues are pointed out to them, they tend to react quite quickly. The larger operators sometimes have the constraints of head office to deal with and area managers and so on and so forth. But that said, you know, my experience is they're equally as agile when there's a significant issue pointed out to them. So I don't think there is a correlation between size and problem. No.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Connor.
I just thought I'd say thank you to the officers for putting this together. I read through this over the week. I think it's really good and it's important we have this in place to go to consultation. So I'm happy with it. But I just wanted to note thank you to the officers for putting it together.
Thank you, Connor. Marcus.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I won't comment on the report or anything. I'll rant about anything or anything else. But no, it is excellent. It's good. I'll second. Needs a proposal and seconded to go to consultation. Happy to second. What I wanted to ask was actually touched on the white paper, and of course a lot of the issues that have come out here is because the white paper's there to. I'm not going to get political, is there to address the fact that there's not been one for many years. It doesn't mention the fact that maybe the first one didn't work. So at what point does this council as a local authority consult? Who then decide, because obviously as individuals we could all consult on the white paper and I'm sure lots of people consult, but as a local authority, and I assume there's actually, as a group nationally, they hold some weight. At what point do we consult? How do we consult and how do we decide what we're saying in that consultation?
That is a good question. I'll probably defer to Richard in a minute, but I think to be fair, it's only just been published, and the ethos of what they've done in the introduction is that I think pretty much that there's going to be consultation on some elements, and there'll be regulatory changes. So I don't think it's clear yet whether that'll be a big consultation or it'll just be on certain elements, and whether that'll be restricted to online gambling or land-based gambling. But we'll do our best to keep up to date with that. And if there's something we feel you'd like to comment on, we'll certainly make you aware of that, if that helps.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Just a couple of points I'd make. I know the publication of the white paper has been coming for a very long time, and I don't feel it will get published in this Parliament, maybe. I suspect we'll have to rewrite parts of the policy once something is eventually published or legislation passed. And also, people that are concerned about the proliferation of betting shops, I think that's on the turn now. I think we're going to see a falling off of betting shops and closures, especially if the white paper comes down hard on fixed odds betting terminals, because if they increase the limits all the time you can spend on them, that's what makes the betting shops money at the moment. There is also a distinct correlation between betting shops and deprivation, where they're located, as Diogo, I can't remember what the word is, Diogo, but you mentioned it with the specific premises in Bridgewater. Also, the Gambling Commission have been clamping down on the large firms with some very, very large fines to some operators, national operators, for not complying with legislation, whether that be with regard to money laundering or Think 21 or Think 25. And I think that's all I wanted to say at the moment. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your questions.
Can I come back on it?
Yeah, Marcus.
I'm going to stick to the white paper, because actually what the chair just mentioned then was obviously you have parliamentary time, and you know they all seem to be a bit obsessed with a few other things in Parliament at the moment. Sometimes not necessarily related to policies, but that's how it is. But of course, before you know it, you've got a general election. Before you know it, you've got a new government, and before you know it, oh, this is being kicked down with wherever down the road a bit because it's not in the thing that they want to deal with at the time. And obviously, when you've heard some of the concerns that Councillor Coles and concerns with planning and the proliferations of betting shops and things like that, and obviously online gaming that some people think need dealing with now. How do we, as a local authority, get the government to do, or even try and ensure that, as licensing officers, you see the problems at the front line? How do you ensure that the government realises that they can't just kick the white paper down the road just because they happen to be a different government of a different colour?
That is a very good question. I have to confess I don't know the answer. I think what you're saying is right, because they put an estimate on. I think the expression on the white paper was the earliest the changes will come in is a year or year and a half. And as you said, parliamentary processes change, priorities change. So it's anyone's guess, I would say, although I don't want to be quoted on that necessarily. But I think the important thing is that if we can keep an eye on what the outcome is, if it does stall, I guess there's lobbying through MPs potentially. I think that would be a way forward. I think that happened with the Licensing Act review going back a few years now. We'll do our best to inform you locally. In terms of the policy, though, we did have a consideration for a little while. Should we future-proof it? At the moment, it's probably too impossible to guess what might come in to future-proof it. So I think Chair touched on it. We're supposed to review this every 3 years. Licensing policy is 5 years. This, for some reason, is 3. So as soon as something comes in, I think we just change it and then go out to consultation. But in terms of how you engage with government process, I can't think of anything other than lobbying, unless we can get hold of a consultation that does come out, and we'll keep our eyes open for that, can't we? And we'll make you aware of it straight away. Whether you then choose to go through as a committee or as individuals is down to you then, I think.
Thank you, Alan. I'm aware that extensive consultation has already been taken place with regard to the white paper. and also significant lobbying by the bigger firms, because of course government are, like they are with anything like this, caught between two areas, I suppose, because a significant income goes to government from the gambling industry, and they're always going to be considering that before they introduce legislation that restricts it. The word I was looking for with Diogo was alluded to. Just to get back on that. Thank you very much. Thank you for your considered and extensive questions. That's brilliant. It's good to know that we've taken the time to read the policy and also to ask Alan some challenging questions. I'm not going to go into them now, but under tracks, I think there's some things that can be improved in that, but I'll come to you with that, Alan, separately, just from personal experience. Right, next I've got to ask the committee. Yeah, so I'm coming to recommendations. I've got to ask the committee to permit the draft statement of principles document to be available for consultation as required by the Gambling Act 2005. Are we all in favour? Yes, sorry, Marcus will second.
Well, I think
Diogo will, Connor will propose, Marcus will second. All in favour, sorry. Thank you, I think that's unanimous. Any against or abstentions? No, so that is passed. Thank you very much. We next move on to...
Yeah, in this, can you include the minutes from the last meeting? Because apologies, I hadn't put it in the run.
Okay. We've now got to advise you that the minutes attached to the report are for noting, but also the minutes of the last committee meeting. I just wanted to extend a personal thanks to all of you who've attended subcommittees and also gone across old borders, to attend subcommittees. It's been great, and it's good to see that most of you here have actually attended them. And I think we have differences in the way we do things, but they will gradually align. I think the principles are roughly the same. It's just small tweaks we need to make sure we're all doing the same thing in the different areas. So just again, a thanks for doing that, because it does take time out of your day, and you find you're going to sit on the committee for one issue, then suddenly another one's added, and that 2-hour window suddenly goes to 4, and you're wishing you hadn't volunteered. But please continue volunteering, because resources are stretched as regard. We can only have committee members sitting on subcommittees. I know we've been into this, but that unfortunately is the case. Right, so the minutes are for noting only. Yes, Diogo.
Just on the minutes for the previous meeting, which it was item 2, just to query something on that, if I may. It's probably my fault entirely. I did send my apologies, but I sent it. It was a communication with Simon through an email trail, and I probably should have sent it to you, Claire, instead. So that's probably why it's not recorded. So if you're able to record that, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
I'm sure we can, Diogo, and I do remember the email trail. It's very polite. So we will add your apologies. Thank you. Right, if there is no more business, then I shall bring the meeting to a close at 2:55. Thank you all for your attendance. It's great to see such a good turnout, despite nobody chasing you particularly. It's good to see you all. Thank you very much.